British actors Peter Cook and Dudley Moore used to perform a sketch called One Leg Too Few. Cook played a casting agent, and Moore played an aspiring actor named Mr. Spigot. But Mr. Spigot only had one leg. And in typical British understatement, Cook would say, "Now, Mr. Spigot, I couldn't help noticing almost at once that you're a one-legged person. Now, Mr. Spigot, you, a one-legged man, are applying for the role of Tarzan, a role which traditionally involves the use of a two-legged actor. And yet you, a unidexter, are applying for the role, a role for which two legs would seem to be the minimum requirement." The silliness of the situation is compounded by the fact that Mr. Spigot doesn't seem to comprehend how his affliction limits his goal of playing Tarzan. So Cook has to mollify him by assuring him that he has an advantage over any actor with no legs at all. And if they can't find any two-legged actors for the role, they will certainly be calling him. It's theater of the absurd, of course, actually the forerunner to Monty Python. We laugh because it's ridiculous to envision, as Peter Cook says, a one-legged Tarzan swinging through the jungly tendrils shouting, "Hello, Jane." But I wonder if the laughter is also based on something familiar. We've all known people who have some sort of limitation, maybe physical, maybe emotional, maybe cognitive, yet they just don't see it in themselves, or if they do, they won't admit it to themselves or to anybody else. There are a lot of Mr. Spigots running around out there, at least metaphorically hopping from place to place, never acknowledging the parts of their lives that need attention. And I suppose there are 1,001 reasons why. My mother used to tell us, don't make a scene. Whatever happened to us, good, bad, or indifferent, we were not to call attention to the situation or to ourselves. Good Southern children with a Christian raising just didn't do such things. I picture the man in today's reading from Mark that way. Here he was with what we used to call a handicap. Now we call it being differently abled. But when Jesus came into the synagogue, the man didn't call attention to himself. He didn't make a scene. In other stories, the person will cry out, "Jesus, help me," but not this guy. He just passively faded back into the woodwork. Given the ruckus this incident kicked up with the Pharisees, I can understand why this man would not want to make a scene. But Jesus couldn't stand it when custom, culture, or rule took precedence over human need. So he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." Now, I can imagine this guy spending a lifetime trying to hide that withered, atrophied, useless hand. And now Jesus wanted him to hold it out in front of God and everybody. Can you picture his hesitation, his reluctant movement, his looking away from his own affliction? But the gospel writers tell us that it was in the act of stretching out his hand that his hand was healed, restored, good as new. The miracle happened, the healing came, only when he had the courage to stretch out his hand to Jesus. Now, I've known people who had literal, withered, shriveled, atrophied limbs. But I've also known scores of people with other parts of their lives withered. For some, their kindness had withered away. For some, their passion had atrophied. For some, their capacity for love had become paralyzed. Others had lost the ability to empathize with people around them who were hurting or in need. Others had allowed their commitment to Jesus to shrivel and waste away. For still others, gratitude had been practiced so seldom, it had withered and died. I'm reminded of the teenage boy who went to the reading of his grandmother's will after she died. He had been her only grandchild, and she had doted on him all of his life, and so he was confident he was going to receive a sizable portion of her very ample estate. But as the will was read out loud, there were inclusions for his parents and his aunts and his uncles and charitable organizations and foundations and on, but nothing about him. Finally, the lawyer read aloud, "And to my beloved grandson, I leave my Bible and all that it contains." And with that, he picked a large black leather-bound Bible out of the drawer and dropped it in the boy's hands. He said, "Excuse me, are you saying that all my grandmother left me was this crummy old Bible?" The executor said, "Well, according to the will, that's what she wanted you to have." A crimson tide of anger blossomed on the boy's face. "Fine," he snapped, and he shoved his chair back from the table and stashed the hated Bible under his arm, stomped home, threw it in the bottom of a chest at the foot of his bed, and cursed his grandmother's selfishness. Well, the years rolled by, and the anger which blossomed that day became the boy's passion as he grew into adulthood. The older he became, the more embittered he became. And finally, in the sunset years of his life, his anger and cynicism had eradicated all his friendships, alienated all of his relatives, pushed his wife out of his life, and caused even his own children to shun him. At last his health failed, and because no one wanted to take care of him, he was forced to move all alone into a nursing home. As he was cleaning out his house and packing up his meager belongings, he happened across an old chest he remembered using when he was a boy. He opened it up and began dragging out the contents to see if there was anything he wanted to keep. And there in the bottom of the chest was a large, black, leather-bound Bible. The pain and anger of that day long ago resurfaced in him, and he thought how much pleasure it would give him to tear the pages of that Bible out one by one. So he picked up the Bible and he flipped open the front cover, and there inside he found a $20 bill. He turned the next page, and there was another $20 bill. He went to the second page, and he found another $20 bill, and page after page after page after page, until he knew it was true. There was a bill behind every single leaf, a $20 bill behind every single page in his grandmother's Bible. And then he remembered the words from his grandmother's will many, many years before. "To my beloved grandson, I leave my Bible and all that it contains." If only he had stretched out his hand. But instead he kept his anger bottled up, allowing his gratitude to wither and die. And he not only lost out on the money, he lost all the people who mattered to him. Now, you and I come to these Sundays after Easter and we shout, "Christ is risen." We celebrate the new life and the hope released when the stone was rolled away, but we can't be healed until we are willing to stretch out our hand, until we're courageous enough to acknowledge those withered places in our own souls and offer them to Jesus. What's withered within you? What's shriveled up and atrophied in your heart? You have those places just like I do, and they can be healed, maybe not miraculously, maybe only with some effort on your part, but they can be healed. But it all starts with you stretching out your hand, stretching out that part of your life you'd rather keep hidden, walled off from the outside world. It might be difficult. You might even make a scene. But the healing hand of Christ cannot restore the withered part of you until you have the courage to face it. Back in late September, early October of 2011, I was going through what can only be called an emotional tailspin. Every day I was either depressed or angry. Oh, I never let you know, of course, because I'm a trained professional and I can put up a great front. But I was convinced I was a total and abject failure in my profession and in my life. I just knew I was going to go to my grave without one single positive accomplishment attributed to me. I was mad at you. I was convinced either you didn't understand discipleship, which of course was my fault too, or that you just didn't care. I snapped at Lois, I snapped at John and others around here, and my insults had just a little too much sting to them. And one Sunday I came home from church and I vented my spleen to Penny, who by that time had just about enough of it, and she shot back, "So what do you want?" I started in with my list of complaints, but she was having none of it. She exposed every single argument for what it was, a pity party, and she kept circling back to the same question. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And all of a sudden I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I heard myself say, "I want my dad to play his fiddle again." And then my head was in Penny's lap. I was blubbering like a baby, confessing all the conflicting feelings I had about my dad's death just a few months prior, about guilt I was feeling, about wanting desperately for him to be proud of me, about the problems in our relationship, about the joys in our relationship, and it all came pouring out of me like Niagara Falls. And then it was over. And life was good again. And you were back to being the best church south of heaven and north of hell. Here I was, a pastor with countless funerals under my belt, a former hospice chaplain, for crying out loud, supposed to be an expert on the subject of grief, and I couldn't see the grief in myself, or at least wouldn't acknowledge that it was there. But when I stretched out my hand, everything changed. When I offered the withered parts of my life, I began to heal. It doesn't matter what's withered in your life. Stretch it out and give the risen Christ a chance to heal you.